on Fire Sports Podcast, The Spot, season number 4, episode number 51. Yeah, man, and first and foremost, if it's your first time listening, we on Fire Sports Podcast, The Spot. We provide hot fire takes and analysis across the sporting landscape. And if you're OG of the show, man, I appreciate the check-in. And yeah, man, first and foremost, man, I hope you guys had a great weekend. You know, we had a lot of stuff jumping off over the weekend across the sporting landscape. And we can't forget about the moms, man. Mother's Day weekend for all the mothers out there. Once again, happy Mother's Day also as well. You know, I sit back and, you know, gave some love out not only to my mom, but the moms that I know out here just getting it in, who's been a big contributor to all the success of their children. So, man, it was definitely a special and nice little weekend that jumped off. And the NBA playoffs obviously was jumping off across the weekend. There's a lot of teams that's, you know, well, not a lot of teams, but a few teams that's kind of jockeying for that momentum and position. Now we got the Denver Nuggets and the Oklahoma City Thunder. They tied up 2 games to clip now. Congratulations to Oklahoma City winning game 4. It was a must-win game for them. We got the Cleveland Cavaliers. Cleveland Cavaliers getting ambushed in game number 4. Boy, was that game over at halftime as they was up by a 40-piece, man, at halftime. It was a wrap as they was able to hold on, man, and get that big-time game 4 victory. And now they up 3 games to 1. They up 3 games to 1. It looks like Cleveland is on life support at this point. And word on the street is that Donovan Mitchell will be iffy for game number 5 coming up back in Cleveland. And before I get into that, you know, there's a lot of, you know, news jumping across the sporting landscape. And on the NBA tip, you know, Shams reported a little bit earlier this morning that Giannis Antetokounmpo wouldn't turn a blind eye into trying to get out of Milwaukee. You know, the Milwaukee Bucks, they've had just a tumultuous situation over the last couple of years. You know, first round exits out of the playoffs 2 consecutive years, courtesy of the Indiana Pacers. You know, this is a team that brought in Damian Lillard to try to, you know, give it a little oomph. Also, they moved on from Chris Middleton, bringing on Kyle Kuzma. You know, Doc Rivers jumped on that boat too a couple seasons ago. And this is a team that, to me, in the Eastern Conference is going nowhere fast. And Giannis, you know, he's been a committed soldier for the city of Milwaukee. You know, drafted him from Greece when nobody knew who this guy was, coming over to the United States. And, you know, being able to lead the Milwaukee Bucks, back to relevancy in the NBA landscape, because Milwaukee was basically an albatross the last, you know, decade, a couple decades or so. I mean, the last time Milwaukee Bucks had a good ball club, man, was the early 2000s with, you know, Ray Allen and Glenn Robinson and, you know, Sam Cassell, as they, you know, had an epic series with the Philadelphia 76ers, man, back in the early 2000s. And so this is a team that, you know, right now, man, they just kind of caught in the middle. You know, Giannis was able to win them a championship a couple years ago, putting up the 50-piece in the deciding game against the Phoenix Suns. And it seemed like all was good just a week ago. You know, Coach Bud, Mike Budenholzer was the head coach. You know, they moved on from him, brought in Adrian Griffin. They moved on from him after having basically the second best record in the Eastern Conference at the time of his firing. Brought in Doc Rivers, thought Doc Rivers was going to be able to add a little sauce to this team. That didn't work. You know, this is a team that is straight hot garbage. I'm talking about hot garbage defensively. And this was a team a couple years ago when they won the NBA championship. They was one of the best defensive teams in the league. And right now, you know, it's a team that can't stop a cold, can't stop nobody. And Giannis, you know, he's in a rightful situation to kind of explore other situations for him. And, you know, before I get into kind of the speculation of where he may go, because, you know, the NBA is like a soap opera, man. It's really hard to see. I think the first team that come to mind potentially could be the Miami Heat. You know, a lot of people have been throwing a lot of dirt on Pat Riley's name, saying that the game has passed him by. I believe it's a bunch of hogwash, because at the end of the day, you know, Pat has had a long track record of, say, winning. You know, just because, you know, a couple guys won't out, you know, that's the NBA landscape. I mean, think about this for a second. What NBA player you know that's an all-star or superstar caliber player stayed with his same team? You know, I'll help you. The only 2 guys that have stayed with their same team has really been Steph Curry and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Other than that, everybody has moved. Every single body you consider a superstar has moved on. So I can't put that on Pat all the way. The whole Jimmy Butler situation, the Miami Heat, it came down to them not wanting to pay Jimmy Butler, which to me, I think that at the end of the day, it's really a smart move by our organization, especially when you have a guy that's in his mid-30s. These dudes getting paid a big bag of coin nowadays, man. And so it's a situation to where I don't really front. I want, players to get the bag, don't get it twisted. But now with, these salaries going up out of the wazoo, you got the luxury tax and just the implications of the luxury tax jumping off. It's a situation of where the teams really got to, take a second look at, breaking off a guy. We just seen a dude get traded earlier this season in Luka Doncic, where the Dallas Mavericks didn't want to break him off a big bag of coin. So I'm not going to put that all on Pat. I do think that them and Giannis agents, they definitely need to have a conversation, because I think that might be a good situation for him. And there's going to be other situations coming across the board. I know a lot of my people, man, up in Chi-Town, up in Chicago, wishing upon a star that, the Bulls will try to go after Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I'm going to go ahead and put it out here, man. The front office and the general management of the Chicago Bulls presently, them dudes got baby nuts. They ain't got the nuts to make a move like that, because they don't have the cachet to make a move like that. We don't see it. We haven't seen it in a track record before, since, AK, has become the general manager of Torres Carnisovis, who's become the general manager of the Chicago Bulls. This guy, man, is going to Vegas with $2 thinking he's going to get rich. It ain't happening. So I just don't see that situation happening. So we'll see, man. This was big time news. I wouldn't say that I was surprised when I saw it come down the pipeline earlier this morning. It's definitely a situation where Giannis got every right to be frustrated, because the organization is just kind of stuck in mediocrity. And when you have, superstar players like that right about now, is that those guys are going to be looking on the other side of the fence. We're going to keep it all the way 100 on that. So we'll definitely see, man, as this thing unfolds. I'll probably go get at you guys again a little bit later on this week, just with the tea leaves from this whole situation. But it was a nice little bevy of news this morning that came across the sports desk. So we'll definitely see what that do. Also, over the weekend, we had in the National Football League the sudden retirement of Derek Carr. There was the speculation coming out around the time of the NFL draft that Derek Carr had a whole shoulder situation, that was more than likely is going to require him to have surgery and pretty much be limited, or might even be out for next coming season. The New Orleans Saints, they got Tyler Slow from the Louisville Cardinals in the NFL draft. And so we'll see what he do. This kid does have a big time arm. I mean, he's 25 years old. He's not your prototypical, rookie, as far as age is concerned. But the guy do got a cannon for an arm. So, there's a lot of speculation about the whole Shedeur Sanders situation, of whether the New Orleans Saints would be interested in his services. And, they kind of passed him on just with that. And so now they don't have their guy. And, Derek Carr, he's had a good career. I don't think it's quite a Hall of Fame career, but I think it's pretty close to it when you look at his numbers. Over 40,000 yards passing in the National Football League. I think he got close to about 275 touchdowns over his career. So, he's not going to make the Hall of Fame. He's definitely in the Hall of Very Good. Moved on from the Raiders. Had a long career out there, man, in the Bay. Before they moved up to Las Vegas, and then moved on to the New Orleans Saints. And so, man, I wish him the best. He's definitely been a class act in his career across the National Football League. A good stand-up guy. Definitely a leader in the locker room, man. And so I definitely wish him and his family the best, man, as he moves on into his next endeavor. But we got to get into these playoffs, man. And one thing that caught my eye, talking about the playoffs, was really the game between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Indiana Pacers. Because I was looking at that game kind of closely just to see, after Cleveland had won Game 3 in blowout fashion. It's one of the best performances I've seen from Donovan Mitchell. I mean, he's got plenty of 40 and 50-point, games in the playoffs, but that one was much needed in game number 3. And, Cleveland was on the upswing. They got, Mobley back into the fold. You got Darius Garland back into the fold. And so it was a real, litmus test for the Indiana Pacers, man, to be able to quell off this team. And boy, did they come out with the Mike Tyson uppercuts and hooks and got that thing over with in the first couple rounds. This game was over by halftime, man, as the Indiana Pacers just straight DDT'd the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Cleveland right now, man, they're down 3-1. This is a team that, many would think that they had a chance at getting to the NBA Finals, me being one of them. I thought it was one of the best matchups if we wanted to go against the Boston Celtics that was to be offered in the Eastern Conference. But Indiana smelled blood. And this is a team that, I was kind of, iffy about during the regular season. They got a little bit hot towards the end of the regular season. They parlayed that into the NBA playoffs. Big time first round win and first time matchup against the Milwaukee Bucks, as I just mentioned. Showed them the door for the second consecutive season. And there's been a lot of talk about Tyrese Halliburton, just whether this guy is just, overrated. Made the Olympic team. A lot of people were salty about that. We had the whole incident with his father, approaching Giannis after they got rid of the Milwaukee Bucks. But this guy is coming up playing some big time basketball for the Indiana Pacers. Also, too, man, can't forget about Pascal Siakam. This is a guy that has a ring, with the Toronto Raptors a couple years ago. He's playing some decent ball for him. Miles Turner playing some good ball for him. Nembhard just being that glue guy playing some ball for him. Benedict Mathurin out there just being a villain out there playing some good ball for him. And right now they got Cleveland's number. As I mentioned, we got Donovan Mitchell, man. Looks like he's going to be iffy for game number 5. And I think that if he don't play in game number 5, this series is over. And to me, Cleveland is already on life support. I don't think they get out of this 3-1 hole. But I think that without Donovan Mitchell in game number 5, I think that probably be their final game of the season. I'm just not sure. A lot of people have been questioning just the validity of the injury to Darius Garland, as well as, big man, down low, man, getting it in. And so I'm Evan Mobley. I'm just not sure if Cleveland, and I'm gonna give all the credit to Mad Dog Russo, Chris Russo. He said that this team was a regular season team. I mean, this team won 64 games in a regular season. I just thought they had enough firepower, man, to be able to get past a pesky Indiana Pacers team. And it's looking like, man, this season will end just on a sour note. Kenny Atkinson, man, he got to take some heat from this as well, because, this is a guy that won the reigning coach of the year, just got that award. But he's had some iffy decisions, especially in game number 2, by not putting another guard out there, man, opposite of Donovan Mitchell, to be able to, either inbound the ball or be able to handle the basketball, man. So for this team not to be at their upper crest as far as just intensity, and knowing that Indiana is a real ball club, once they went down 2-0, especially at home, they put themselves in a big hole, man. So we'll definitely see, man, what they do, man, as game number 5 will be played on tomorrow night. So, like I said, man, the Cleveland Cavaliers is looking like it might be a funeral tomorrow night, man. We'll see if they're able to bounce back in game number 5. Also, coming up, I'm going to get into that whole Denver Nuggets and Oklahoma City Thunder series, as that series is tied up 2-2. Also, can't forget about the matchups tonight. We got a doubleheader tonight between the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks. As Boston, they found themselves in that 2-0 hole as well. They came back, bounced back in game number 3 up in New York. That series is 2-1. I think for the Knicks, for them to win this series, they got to win that game tonight. They got to win this game tonight. No question about it. The New York fans, they was taken out of the game very, very early, as Boston came out hotter than a firecracker, man, shooting basically over 50% from three-point range. This is a team that I've been critical of all season long, so we'll get into that matchup, man, coming up. Also, too, can't forget about the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Golden State Warriors, as the Timberwolves are up 2-1 in that series, as the Warriors, they had a fighting chance at winning game number 3. They was, let go of the rope a little bit, man, towards the end, as Jimmy Butler was effective early in the game, but not so in what I call crunch time. And we got to talk about bomb man Draymond Green. We got to get into Draymond Green, man. So I'll get into that coming up. First and foremost, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate you. Yeah. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spot. Welcome back. And we got a big time game coming up tonight, man. We got 2 games coming up tonight between the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks. We got the Golden State Warriors against the Minnesota Timberwolves, as the Knicks are up 2-1, and that's them in the Celtics series, as well as Minnesota's up 2-1 on the Golden State Warriors. First, I'm going to get into this whole Boston Celtics and Knicks series. You know, the Knicks came back, man, surprised the Boston Celtics, obviously, in the first 2 games up in Boston, man. Epic 2 20-point game comebacks against the Boston Celtics. And it seemed like the house was on fire for the Boston Celtics. And to me, I was very, very critical of Joe Mazzulla because I felt that he was part of the get-along gang. And to me, what he reminds me of, man, is just basically a manager more so what you would see now in the new age of Major League Baseball, where basically the analytics and the general manager, the people upstairs, basically put the lineup sheet out there, man, and he just basically turned in the lineup sheet. And I think Joe Mazzulla is in the same ilk because there's no way that you drop both those games up in Boston, man, to a team that, to me, they're more talented than the New York Knicks. And I'm not trying to put shade on the Knicks. You know, the New York stand up. You know, definitely Knicks fans have been, foaming at the mouth, man, for the Knicks being a contender for many, many moons at this point. But to me, it was inexcusable Boston losing those 2 games, man, up there in the Boston Garden. And when they transitioned back to New York, it was a must-win game in game number 3. And I thought Boston did a good job, man, of punching, the Knicks in the mouth early on, putting up 36 points in the first quarter. I thought that was paramount, coming out hitting their first 3 3-pointers in this game. And I thought that they set the tone just from a energy standpoint. And, in professional sports, especially in the NBA and the playoffs, you got to have a short memory because each game is its own story or its own movie. So, the veteran teams or the teams that have been to the mountaintop before, they understand just how to operate with a short memory. And I think Boston did a good job in that. Shout out to Peyton Pritchard, man. He had a big-time game off the bench for the Boston Celtics. I mean, this guy was on fire. Last couple games of the playoffs for him, he had been broke as a joke. I thought that energy that he brought was huge and paramount for the Boston Celtics. And to me, they're really an energy type of team, especially when you talk about the others, guys like Derek White, guys like Drew Holiday, guys like Al Horford. Those guys are just huge energy guys, and I just thought that with them shooting 1,000,000 threes in the first 2 games and not running no kind of offense, is that you make those guys kind of short. And I thought that, to me, they put the pressure on the Knicks, and the Knicks was not able to bounce back in this basketball game, man. And so now, we transition tonight. I think that Jalen Brunson, he has to have one of those special nights. And I'm not saying that he don't have it in him because Jalen Brunson has been that guy. I mean, he's been straight up that guy for the New York Knicks in this whole playoff run. So I know he got it in him. But I just think that tonight he's got to give you that 35-40 piece because Boston, even though they're down 2-1, they kind of smell blood a little bit. Meaning that for them, they just in a situation of, hey, this is a 1-game playoff series, really. Meaning you win this game tonight, you get home court advantage back, and you transition yourself back to Boston. And it turns into a best 2 out of 3 type of series. So we'll see. Another dude that, I got an APB out there for is Karl-Anthony Towns. He has to be that guy. Meaning that you can't just allow Jalen Brunson just to kind of be on his island. Shout out to Mikal Bridges as well, even though he didn't have a good game 3. Those guys have at least given you moments in this series. Karl-Anthony Towns, in game 2, he had a good first half. And I think he had like 18 points in the first half. Only shot 1 3 in the whole game, I believe. And so to me, he got to get back to the block. Back underneath the block and playing aggressive, man, because when you have, big men who want to be relegated jump shooters, sometimes it takes away from their aggressiveness, man, on the inside. And so I think that they got to go back to that. We might see another OG Anunoby moment. And I think he's the most versatile player on the New York Knicks. Being able to D up him and Mikal Bridges, as well as be able to give you some offense and show you that athleticism. And so I think he's going to be a key cog as well. So this is going to be an interesting game tonight. It is a must win for the New York Knicks. Now, to me, I'm not going to front. I got the Boston Celtics in this game because to me, if the Knicks go up 3-1, I think Boston is on a road to being eliminated in the second round. We seen it a couple years ago. The Boston Celtics be down 3-0, man, and be able to get it to a game 7. I just think that if the Knicks go up 3-1, man, it's just too big of a mountain for them to overcome, especially with the standpoint that the Knicks have that confidence that no matter if they go down 15 or 20 points, they're still able to bounce back. And so this game is, to me, the game of the season for Tom Thibodeau and the New York Knicks. We'll definitely see what it do. I do like the energy that McBride does bring off the bench for them as well. Obviously Mitchell Robinson been getting some burn, but, you can't put him in the game at the end of the game because Mitchell Robinson can't shoot free throws. So we'll see what, mechanisms that Tom Thibodeau was able to do in this game, but it's definitely a must-win game, man, for the New York Knicks. So we'll definitely see what that thing do later on. And also, a series that, to me, this injury changed the whole entire series, man. And I'm talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Golden State Warriors. Steph looks like, he's going to be reevaluated coming up on Wednesday just to see if he's able to get out there. And, all the pressure really is on Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy Butler, he came out last game, had a good game. He had 30-plus points, 33 points, 7 boards and 7 assists. I thought, he was kind of into his bag, and just seeing that Minnesota really wasn't trying to double team him. So he just caught the ball in his sweet spot in that post, or that mid-post area, and he was able to go to work. And that's Jimmy Butler's patented game. But as we saw once we got deep into game number 3, is that Butler really was nowhere to be found in the fourth quarter or mid to late fourth quarter. And I just simply think that because of you saw really the fact of Steph being out. I thought Buddy Hield, he had a pretty decent game. He had 14 points. But, if Butler's going to give you 30-plus points, he got to have another guy with him, man, riding shotgun with him, man, at least give him a dub or so forth. And I just think that they fell short. Also, too, we got to get into this whole Draymond Green situation. Now, OGs of the show know how I feel about Draymond Green. I think this guy's an overrated guy. And I've been saying it the last couple of years. I think he's a fake tough guy. I've been saying that the last couple of years, and I've been consistent in that. It seems like whenever the heat get hot for this guy, he's either going to pull out a race card or something like that, or going to do something stupid. And, in this series, with him or with Curry being out, he's just a guy in the band. I mean, this guy put up, 2 points, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists, what we call a fake triple-double, triple deuces. I mean, come on, fam. First and foremost, it looks like the first game when y'all played without Steph Curry, you was trying your best to get your ass ejected out of the game. And then we come back in a pivotal game that to me was a must-win game, because I just think that Golden State can't put all their chips on Steph Curry coming back from a hamstring injury when he's been out and he's not been able to kind of get himself into proper conditioning and so forth, coming smack, dab in the middle of a playoff series. I think you asking a lot out of the guy being able to do that. And so for me, it's a situation where guys like Green, you got to be able to get some kind of scoring punch, or at least at minimum give me a double digits rebounding. But for him to put up that measly stat line, and it seemed like every time this guy doesn't play well, we hear crickets from this dude, or he gonna pull out some kind of excuse. This time it was the angry black man. And as a black man, I'll go ahead and put it out there, fam. You do look like an angry black man when you can't control yourself, fam. At the end of the day, we can't pull that card out when it's just, easy to grab, dude. I mean, at the end of the day, you're a grown man, fam, and you got to be able to, come across as a guy that's a veteran in this league and don't blow his cool, especially in a situation where your franchise player and your guy's out, dude. You got to step up and be a real leader to this team. And it looks like, with them losing this game and their step away, this thing, especially tonight, if they drop this game, this series is over. I'm just going to keep it 100. So it's definitely the biggest game of the Golden State Warriors season coming up later on tonight. We'll definitely see, if they're able to, especially guys like Green and so forth. I ain't worried about Jimmy Butler, but guys like Green, guys like Buddy Hield, guys like Moses Moody, who's been on a milk carton this whole series. Those are the guys that have to play at a high level, man, for Golden State to be able to knock off Minnesota. Can't forget about, the Timberwolves and Anthony Edwards. We saw in the second half of that game, he ratcheted up a little bit and got really into his bag and got downhill. So he coming, meaning that, I expect him to come out and, play with that, smell blood type of attitude, man. He'd already knocked off a few future Hall of Famers in this playoffs alone. So he going to be on one, man. So we'll definitely see what it do. I'm going to keep it 100 with you guys, man. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves win this game tonight. I just think that for me, Edwards as well as Julius Randle, can't forget about my man Big Bull, Julius Randle. He's been playing some good basketball in the whole playoffs for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think he's going to be at it again with at least a dub and so forth. And I just think it's going to be too much for the Warriors to bear. So I got the Minnesota Timberwolves winning this game tonight as well as going up 3-1 in this series. So we'll definitely see what it do. But coming back before we wrap up, definitely gonna get into the Denver Nuggets and the Oklahoma City Thunder series. Gonna get into that a little bit as well. And also, to another breaking news that came across the desk a little bit earlier today, man, is that the NBA, as we all know, man, they transition into NBC next year. It'll be the end of TNT's relationship with the NBA, as NBC has tossed their hat back into the fold. And word on the street is that Mr. Michael Jeffrey Jordan is gonna be a contributor to the NBA. And boy, we're going to get into that, man, as we close this thing out, man. First and foremost, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot. Man, before we get out of here, man, don't forget to check your boy out on YouTube. We on Fire Sports. Definitely dropping them episodes on YouTube, man. You can check your boy out. Also, too, man, on Podbean. Also, where all podcasts can be listening to. Also, we on Twitter at We on Fire Sports. Drop your boy a line, man. We out here trying to get it in. So I appreciate, man, all the love and the feedback as well. But before we get out of here, we definitely got to talk about this Oklahoma City Thunder and these Denver Nuggets series, as this series presently right now is tied 2-2. And game number 4 to me was interesting because I thought that game number 4 was a low-scoring game on both ends, as obviously the Thunder was able to win this game 92-87. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander putting up a 25, 6, and 6. Jokic with 27 points and 13 boards and 4 steals in this game on his end. I thought the 2 MVP guys pretty much kind of canceled themselves out. And to me, interestingly enough, especially Denver, man, they came out flat as a pancake, only dropping 8 points in the first quarter of this game. And I thought it was going to be a situation where the Thunder could potentially rout the Denver Nuggets. Now, Denver, they fought back into this game. As I mentioned, it was a close game. But to me, this was what I call a bookends game, meaning that the energy that Denver brought in the first quarter and the energy that Denver brought in the fourth quarter was simply the reason that they lost this game. I think Jokic, he looked a little worn down just a little bit. But as I mentioned a little earlier, is that the playoffs really is his own story. And for a guy who just, a couple games ago put up a 40-20 piece, I ain't tripping on Nikola Jokic. I mean, obviously, a lot of NBA players would love to have a 27-point, 13 rebound, and 4 steal game in the NBA playoffs, man. And for most teams, that's good enough from your star player to maybe get you over the hump. But, I just thought that the Thunder, they just made just those plays, and they came out with a defensive mindset early in this game. I thought they set the tone in this game. And so, to me, game 5, because I mentioned, remember, especially OGs of the show, I told you that game number 3 was going to be the best game probably played in the series, and boy, it was. As obviously that game went into overtime. Aaron Gordon, hit a big shot, take that game into overtime, and the Nuggets was able to handle that business in OT. But to me, game number 5 is going to be the litmus test of that again, meaning that we're going to see that whole jump off again. I think it's going to be high intensity. I think it's going to come down to, a last shot type of situation. And I do think that this game is going to be played in the hundreds and so forth as far as the score is concerned. But that to me is an interesting series because I think that the winner of that series to me is favored to win or get into the NBA Finals this year out of the Western Conference. I just think that both teams are kind of solid like that, and I ain't sleeping on Minnesota, obviously Golden State. I just think that those two teams are how they're built. They just got a little bit more upside to me than the Timberwolves as well as the Golden State Warriors. So we'll see what it do, man. That game or the game number 5 in that series will be played obviously tomorrow between Denver and Oklahoma City. But I just think that to me, that's a hard series to kind of predict because it's really game by game in that series, swag by swag in that series. So we'll see what that thing do, man. But I'm definitely going to be excited to check that game out tomorrow. I think it's going to be another barn burner, kind of closer to what Game 3 was in this series. So we'll definitely see what it do. And before I get out of here, some words came across the sports desk a little bit earlier, man. And for me, just being a sports fan, big time sports fan, man, for many, many years. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, man, as the NBA is transitioning over to NBC. And word on the street, man, they're going to bring my man MJ, man, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, into the fold as a contributor for the NBA on NBC. Obviously Jordan, he pretty much built NBC as a sports entity from an NBA standpoint. The first season that, NBA on NBC was implemented back in the 1991 NBA season was the year that my Chicago Bulls won the first NBA championship with my man Mike Fratello, obviously, and Marv Albert. Magic Johnson was, he did a little work over there at NBC, as well as, Isaiah Thomas, and just, so I thought that they always had a good little bevy of, OGs or, heavyweight, guys who, played the sport, know the sport. And I think that Jordan might be the next imprint of that. It's going to be interesting to see because Mike, obviously, since he sold his stake into the, Charlotte Hornets, he's been kind of, quiet as far as on the basketball tip, just being just a super OG. So we definitely going to see, man, just how that whole situation unfolds, man. I thought that was good news. We obviously got the TNT guys, man, Chuck, Ernie, Kenny, Shaq, moving on to ESPN through the licensing agreement. So we're going to have a nice little couple twists coming into the next NBA season. So we'll definitely see what that do. But, yeah, I'm very intrigued, man, about this news, man, that Jordan going to come through or fall through as a contributor for NBA on NBC next season, man. I can't wait. So that's it, man. Once again, man, I appreciate, man, all the love, man, all the feedback, man. Just getting down with your boy, man. And like I said, for your first time listening, man, we coming 2-3 shows a week. We on Fire Sports Podcast, The Spot, providing hot fire takes and analysis across the sporting landscape as we move on along in this month of May. Man, I appreciate y'all, man. I check you guys out later on this week. We on Fire Sports Podcast, The Spot.